Tiffany. You have the very colorful mask.
Yeah, we are live.
Okay, happy Thursday. We are joined once again by the one and only Sean M. So he wore a mask, so now we're all wearing masks. But I feel like that probably won't end well. So that didn't last very long.
It's the thought that counts, Ben. Yeah. At least if we were going outside, we could keep them. But masks don't lend themselves particularly well to microphones.
I think you are our most popular guest ever, and you had us. Literally, fortunately, it's the last time I cried was, I think, when you were on last. So
right, I was smart today, and I actually took off my eye makeup first. So.
Oh dear! See, now you're putting pressure on me. It's hard to live up to first time standards.
I mean, you probably started up there, but I'm confident you'll take it even higher. I mean, if there's somebody who has stories, it's you.
I've got stories. You just got to be able to remind me of them and lead me into them, and then I'll come out with the stories. There's plenty to talk about.
No pressure, so it's mutual pressure. So I would love to start talking about with you something that Ben and I were just talking about, sort of trying to think about how do we handle this on the blog, but it seems like it's something that you guys are dealing with as an airline industry, which is how do you sort of set up the messaging around it's safe to travel if, and have people really understand that what comes after the if is a key part of what makes it safe to travel versus just everything's open because why not?
And I think it goes beyond flying, in terms of encouraging people to go to destinations and all of that.
Well, I think the key message, which, I'll say one thing. Over here, we've been lucky enough to have a very well coordinated response. So it's been contact tracing, testing, movement restrictions in certain areas, social gathering restrictions, and then loosening and tightening in certain areas as required. So it's actually been coordinated extremely well. And, again, when I tell people what's going on, and they're like, and you're in Africa? And yeah, but, Africa has actually had a lot of experience dealing with pandemics and health issues and so forth. And there is no safety net of a medical system. If your frontline fails, people will die. So people have an incentive of complying with restrictions, complying with things as such. But as far as the airline industry goes, when we had suspended domestic operations for 4 weeks in the end of it. And when we restarted operations, one of the key things we looked at was what is the messaging that is going to go out from different agencies. And when we tailored protocols, and I mean, protocols are easy to put together. It's how to communicate these protocols and to ensure the stakeholders buy into these protocols. And the key message was we need to have it as an end-to-end experience. So basically, from the moment you enter the terminal on one end till the moment you exit the terminal at the other end, there is a protocol for everything that might occur. And there is an agency, whether that's the health service, whether that's the civil aviation authority, whether that's the airport company or the airline, or at one of the airports we operate to, which is actually a military base run by the Air Force. The Air Force has the responsibility for some of those functions, and everybody has a responsibility in that. And therefore, there is, if you're not an expert in a certain area, there is someone on site. What do you do if you're doing a temperature check and someone fails it? Do you just simply say, you can't fly today and let them go home? No, there actually is a health officer on site who will be referred to, and he will make an assessment. One issue we actually dealt with was a patient who was traveling to go to a dialysis. And because he was due for a dialysis or whatever else, he had a elevated body temperature. So again, the thermal check picked it up, but it was done by a check-in agent. He obviously isn't a doctor. He doesn't know this, but he had a medical personnel on site who were able to look at it, call the doctor, say, right, I need a copy of such and such and such. It was sent, emailed back and forth, and the guy was eventually cleared to fly. Made it to his dialysis, which actually saved his life, which if he hadn't been able to get his dialysis in a remote northern community, he probably would have died within a few days. So, it's the full planning of it and the confidence that people have. And over here, when we started off operations, certainly we started very small, but our traffic has grown 300% in 3 weeks. We came very close today to almost having a denied boarding for oversales.
Wow.
Which, it's one of those very rare days. And I was like, oh, please, let's have a denied boarding. But
Okay, I'm curious.
It's like
denied
good
boarding
news, bad
compensation-
news, guys.
Yeah, there we go.
Is it government regulated, or the airliner you take, is it voluntary? Usually you would solicit volunteers.
It is government regulated. I mean, there's protocols in there. There's the mandatory compensation we have to pay, or else we can offer them vouchers in excess of that. Basically similar to the jurisdictional things throughout everywhere else. In this case, because of our social distancing on board, it isn't. Our regulator has suspended enforcement of penalties due to actions as a result of the pandemic. So if we had to deny boarding to somebody because on a 50-seat aircraft we were sold to 35 and we can only take 34, we would not be penalized. So we wouldn't have to necessarily pay compensation. Similarly, if we cancel a flight within a week, we're not liable for the compensation on top of the rebooking or refund and so forth. So that is something our regulator has done. For now, but as I said, the message to people is basically one of we have it under control. So put your confidence in us, and you'll be okay. And if you follow our social media, you've seen. It's one thing to tell people, it's another thing to actually put live pictures. And we found that has really been the big difference maker is we've been out there and we've been like, Captain, send us your pictures from the line. Cabin crew, send us your pictures from the line. If you've got a nice full flight of everyone wearing masks, send us a picture. We'll tweet it out for you. And that's been what people have seen and understood. This is what the experience is going to look like. And more people then who have to travel are doing that. One thing, again, which as part of our coordinated response we've been asked to do is not to promote it as much as, certainly, obviously, with our competitors, we want to promote our flights rather than theirs, but not to go in with deep discount sales or try to encourage people to travel. The message for now, at least till the end of the month, is going to be, if you have essential travel needs, air travel is the safest way to get to your destination. So that is the message that we're putting forward. We have a commitment to provide essential transportation services to the communities that we serve. And if you are going to fly, if you are going to travel, you should fly. And if you are going to fly, you should fly with us.
Good answers. For
So
a bit of background.
Oh, go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to say we didn't really introduce Sean M this time around. For those who were joining but didn't join last time. So Sean M is an executive at an airline in Africa. He's the most knowledgeable guy in the airline industry. Period. I'll go with that. He knows everything about everything with airlines. So he's generally awesome and hilarious, as you'll find out when I'm sure he has stories that will top the last one. No pressure. But so what you said was interesting though about. Right now, it's still sort of essential, though. You're not encouraging people sort of to take discretionary travel. At what point, not specific to your airline, but in general, at what point and how does the messaging change? Or how do we get to the point where we say, okay, do travel, but be responsible. Don't, take precautions. Go to places that are safer rather than less safe.
I'm not the expert on this, but I'll tell you from discussions with people who supposedly are the experts on this. Right now, air travel is actually far safer than your everyday activities, simply because of the way we've controlled the ecosystem of air travel with sanitization, masks, checks, symptomatic checks, and so forth. You're far less likely to contract COVID or anything else, and of course filters on board circulation, things as such, than you are on the drive to the airport. And that's simply the case. If you take an Uber to the airport, you're more likely to get COVID from your Uber driver than you are to get it for the rest of your journey. And however, from our government's perspective, certainly the health experts have said maintaining social distancing on board is unnecessary. It serves no useful purpose. It's simply a cost which is being built in. I mean, certainly we've not raised fares, but you're not going to find our X-ray and Tango lowest classes available. You're going to be flying Yankees, Bravos, and stuff like that. So effectively, there is a price that is.
That just made Ben really happy. That whole sentence made him very happy.
There are classes even using the phonetic alphabet. Very exciting.
Sorry. You really need to come into one of our meetings because my average day in the office is like yelling at revenue management team. close off the Bravos on 181, and they're like, okay, but can I get a Lima?
Boy, do I miss it. That's
yeah.
That's my
Come
day.
visit us. But anyway, so for now, the consistency of messaging is the key on a national basis, and in fact, from what our sector ministers told us, it became a cabinet level discussion, and where the president's decision at the end of it was, while I appreciate that there's no real technical reason for this, in order to maintain consistency of messaging, if we want to hammer out maintain social distancing everywhere, we can't say maintain social distancing everywhere unless you're on an aircraft wearing a mask and you've sanitized your hands and the guy next to you is not coughing and so forth. It's easier to just say everywhere. So for now, that's what we've agreed to. They've said that we will review it at the end of the month. We expect over here that there will be some loosening of gatherings. For example, restaurants and things they have always been operating on delivery. They've now loosened up for takeout. We're expecting to have some sort of limited outdoor seating possibilities and so forth. Social gatherings may be loosened. Right now, I think it's at 5 people is a maximum. They may loosen that to 20 and 25. So as that happens, I think people will have more need to travel. I mean, we've got Eid coming up this weekend. It's supposedly going to be on Sunday. That's why we came very close to having an oversold flight today. Hang on, let me look at my thing. I am 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 5 flights completely sold out for tomorrow, 2 in oversale already. So these are positives which we see as people are getting more into the social lives are building back up. When you see the social restrictions lifted, you'll see weddings being rescheduled, funerals which have been held up, memorial services, things like that. There's 2 months of backlog which will catch up. And as that happens and people get more used to traveling more, I think you'll see a floodgate really open up and people have more confidence in it and begin to travel more. And I think the precautions, those who are embracing the precautions, it's become a way of life. I mean, right now it's like you go into any office over here, there's a sanitizer dispenser at the door. I mean, as you're walking into the terminal, our crews just they're still chatting and they just sort of aim their forehead at the guy who's pointing the temperature gun at them. And just like, okay, beep, 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 everyone beeps and off you go through. So, people adjust. Humans are very resilient in that way. And just like we adjusted after 9/11, we'll adjust after this. It's just knowing the right protocols to implement them and making sure they're effective. But airlines are the most flexible, and airlines are actually the people who do the best risk analysis. That's why air transport is the safest form of transport in human history. So as long as we can continue to maintain that mindset in the aviation industry, that we analyze the risk, we mitigate the risk, and we continue to live with it, I think aviation can really take a societal lead in guiding society as a whole in how to proceed with dealing with this.
I think people have including me, because I was never good at science in school. I was good at math, not at science. It is so hard to believe that airplanes are, most studies are now saying that airplanes are actually pretty safe environments. And it's so hard to believe, probably because at least in the US, airlines have historically done such a bad job cleaning planes. Like, you open the seat back and there's someone else's Snickers wrapper and soda
crumbs
can in there.
Everywhere. Endless crumbs. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so I feel like
feel dirty.
It's so tough because studies suggest, okay, there's not many cases that can be traced to planes, and maybe a plane environment is actually safer. But even I struggle to believe that, even though I know it's apparently true, because it just seems so inconceivable how disgusting planes are, at least again in the U.S., to think that these are safe places to be, at least based on how our minds have been trained in the past few weeks. So obviously that is the case, it seems.
Well, there's also,
the public,
Ben, you are doing the exact thing that I was complaining about before Sean got on the call, which is the biggest challenge that we have in the US right now and opening anything up is people prioritizing their feelings over science. And
exactly. Well, and you're right. You're right. And I guess I'm in my mind, I know I need to stop second guessing science, but it feels so weird. For example, when people come on the blog like, wow, a plane that seems like so dangerous, it's hard to respond to someone and be like, no, planes are actually safe, environments. You wouldn't think logically that's the case. And I know logic and science are at odds here, but like there's nothing airlines, at least in the US, have done in the past few years to make us think they're clean under good circumstances, let alone when we have a, highly contagious pandemic. So.
But let me make this statement as well. And I know it's something I've actually stressed to our cleaning team. Cosmetically clean versus disinfected are actually two very different things. You can have a dirty seat, but it can be perfectly safe and disinfected to go with. I mean, certainly there are different chemicals which different airlines use. I mean, the ones which we're using is basically hydrogen peroxide based. And because of that, it's not an aerosol disinfectant. But I know that there's another airline which is using an ethanol and ammonia based disinfectant, which is a spray aerosol. So in our case, certainly, we're wiping down the surfaces. We found that works best for us in terms of avoiding damage to others, to things with contamination and so forth. But if you're doing an aerosol disinfection, you're basically there, you're spraying it, you're letting it sit for whatever the holdover time is. And your seat may have a Snickers wrapper, but it's still effectively been disinfected against the virus. And so the two of those are not really the same. We've gone with this. We've got a checklist which our cleaning team uses. It's all what we call high contact surfaces. So it's sidewalls, windows, tray table, front, back, seatbelt, buckle, front, back, armrests, overhead bin latches, and lavatory door push if the lavatory has been used during the flight, and if the lavatory has not been used during the flight, just the door push. If the lavatory has been used inside the lavatory, all the contact surfaces, inside, outside, wipe down, spray, move on. Headrest covers are replaced after every sector. And we've got it down to science now. We've got.
Right, and you just described a process that, I am pretty sure doesn't happen on most U.S. airlines, even when the plane sits overnight.
And I'll be perfectly honest, it is something that in terms of the full, all surface clean on that, even we had a deep clean, which is every surface clean and everything per frame once a week. We did a full clean, was what we call, which basically doesn't do the full, it's the cosmetic clean as well as the checking for no damage and so forth, which was done. Yeah. Every night that gets done. And basically at outstations, it was just the crew went to put the seatbelts back together. We didn't even change the headrest covers until it got back to base. So every time it got back to base, we do a headrest cover. So 2-3 sectors, depending on where it went and how it was routed, it went to that. Now we're doing this at outstations. And the remarkable thing we've got, and this is where I'm very proud of our team over here, is we've reduced our staffing per flight by 30%. We've added the additional cleaning. And we've actually reduced our turn times by 2 minutes on average because people are actually buying into it. No, and Ben, I know you're looking skeptical.
I'm trying to do the math on that. I'm
like, you've made it a priority, and it's something that's required, and seems like there's some pride in it.
Precisely. People know that this is no longer just something that. Yeah, God, I've got to go clean the damn plane. It is now something that, look, we need to clean this plane if we want to get it out. Until we fill out a checklist that we've done everything, we're going to get a delayed departure. And because of that, I've actually got cabin crew have volunteered to assist with the cleaning. So we now have it basically, we tried to put more bodies and everything. What we found works best is 2 cabin crew and 3 actual cleaners in the aisles, otherwise they step on each other. And everyone's got a task. You start from the front, you're starting from the back, you're pulling the old headrest covers, you're laying the new headrest covers. 8 minutes, we can do the aircraft, top to bottom, full clean.
Right, because you have 5 people turning an Embraer.
But I have 5 people without a single extra person. I have my check-in agents who, when check-in closes, move to the airside and then do this. When they finish doing that, the crew finish their security check, and these guys then go to the boarding gate and say, we're now ready to boarding. We're not tearing boarding passes, obviously, because it's non-contact. But as the system moves through, it's a process and it's evolving. But as I said, when I'm looking at my on-time performance, we started off taking a lot of delays. On this, our on-time performance for this week has been 98.3%. And the reason for that is the 2 reasons are weather for some flights and the biggest chunk of delays was because the captain got stuck in an elevator on his first flight of the day, and that just delayed the whole line for the day. So,
sounds like a story as well.
oh wait,
so
the captain got in the elevator, pressed button, and stopped.
Short story. So you guys are doing all of this. Obviously, you have amazing buy-on from like all your different teams and your different work groups, which is fantastic. How about passengers? Like, it's very controversial in the U.S. right now, the mask wearing, like that we started the call with. So
yeah.
How do you
Well, we're very fortunate again that this is a regulation that certainly we worked with to develop, but it has now become a regulation. If you do not have a mask, you will not be permitted. Forget not being permitted to fly. You will not get into the airport terminal. At your initial screening checkpoint, which is conducted by the health service at the entry to every terminal, you will be screened for thermal screening. You will be screened to verify that not only do you have a mask, but you have a mask that is compliant with the standards. So basically, a repurposed sock pulled across your face is not going to cut it. You're going to need to have a mask that actually is a non-specialized mask, such as your basic surgical mask, but not an N95 or so forth. We don't recommend those, even for our own staff. And furthermore, which is a requirement which has been imposed by our health service for now, is that every passenger must have a personal container of hand sanitizer with them before boarding the aircraft. So these are checks which are actually done at the checkpoint before they come in. You don't like it, too bad. And we've had initially situations where passengers didn't show up with it. One of our most lucrative ancillary lines, although we're not making any profit, we're making a profit of about, I think, 3 cents per unit, is actually selling personal bottles of hand sanitizer. So if you don't have one when you get to the airport, fine. We charge 10 CDs, which is about $1.80 for a 60 ml bottle. And we've actually, because it's 60 ml and it's nice travel size, we actually have people who are like, oh, I'll take 3. When this is supposed to be the emergency last resort one.
Right. So maybe you need to have tiered pricing, Sean. We're like, 1 is $1.80, 2 are $1.90, 3 are $2.
We have taken a very firm decision that nothing safety related is going to be a profit center for us. So as far as that goes, even if it comes down to people needing masks, we're carrying extra masks. Certainly, they have to have it to be able to get into the terminal. But if your mask should get contaminated, dropped, lost, or whatever, we're not going to charge you to provide a new mask. We have spares, we have everything, and but we also need them accounted for, because if you don't, we can. I remember one night where we had 3,000 pairs of gloves evidently used by a single engineering shift overnight. We were like, yeah, try that one again.
Right. So what would it take then, given all of these restrictions and the very consistent response from like your local government and other governments in the region? Some of them, are more on board than others.
Tanzania.
Right.
Not the ones recommending church and ginger to get over
What would it take for you to feel, and this is obviously not an official standpoint, but like, what's the timeline for letting, you think, Americans into your country? Like, what would you have to see in order to feel like that's a good idea for them to go and travel to Ghana?
Not a good question today, because I've been just dealing with a TripAdvisor review from a very self-entitled American passenger who I've effectively told to go do unnatural things to herself, very politely, of course. But yeah, I don't see it happening anytime in the near future from the discussions we're having. Sorry?
Then I can't visit you. How are we supposed to have, dinner?
Come on your German passport. You're more likely to have Germans welcome than Americans at this point. But no, and unfortunately, this is the reality. Even with various State Department people that we've spoken with, they are very reluctant. The policy over here has been that any reopening of borders is going to happen on a reciprocal basis. So a set of standards will be set up and it'll be reciprocal. And if that standard's going to be, you will need to conduct, for example, say Nigeria and us decide to enter into a reciprocal agreement. There will be testing in Nigeria and we will accept Nigeria's tests and they will accept ours. And accordingly, that'll be part of your travel documentation, your passport, any visa if required, and your test results from an approved laboratory in this country within the last period and so forth. The problem is there is nobody in the United States government at this point who seems willing to be able to make a commitment, because as they've said off the record, we can make a commitment based on sound policy, but a single tweet can change that. And they're not willing to make that commitment. And as a result, it's going to be very hard for the United States to get into any of these multilateral or even bilateral protocols and maintain their position in those protocols. And as a result, I think most countries are going to be very reluctant to use the United States as one of their opening people. They're not, if you want to do a test case, you've got to do it in optimal conditions. You'll do it with a trusted partner. And unfortunately, the reality is at this point, even the United States government doesn't believe they're a trusted partner for someone. And that's as political as I'm going to get.
No, I think it's good to say, because like we've been having this whole conversation around like when is it responsible to travel again, and the answer is increasingly that it's very different depending on what is happening in your local community, whether or not it's sort of responsible for you to be leaving.
And I think the concept of local community is also one which becomes interesting, because it all depends on what level you're considering your community to be local. When we started planning for COVID, we started planning actually in January. When this was beginning to get going in China, we realized it's going to be a matter of when rather than if this is going to be affecting us. And we started following the CAAC guidelines from China primarily. And what really impressed us with that was that the level of data that they had in terms of local cases, where literally they were looking at in some cases down to single blocks, where you had statistics at that level, that in this block there are 3 people affected, and if there are less than 3, it's considered medium risk. If there's more than 5, it's considered high risk, and so forth. Now, even here, we have hotspot areas, which are communities, but these communities are still tens of thousands of people. In the US, the level seems to be primarily at state or city level. I think state level is probably the most accurate level. And, a lot of these subdivisions and where what you're talking about local varies so widely from country to country and from region to region within the country that it's really impossible to set a policy that has one size fits all. What do you also consider to be free of the virus? In some countries, they consider it to be a single negative test. Over here, free of virus is 2 negative tests 7 days apart. So as a result, when they look at, the recovery rate's a lot lower here. Yeah, but that's a different standard. If we use somebody else's standard, we would have a very different recovery rate. So even looking in terms of what statistics are and what the statistics mean, it's, you're comparing not even apples and oranges, you're comparing apples and sheep. So they've got very little to do with
apples
each
and
other.
sheep, both of which the president of Tanzania gives COVID tests to prove.
Poor for everything I've got against Magufuli right now, because I genuinely believe, I genuinely believe Magufuli means well. I think Magufuli has become very autocratic lately. He started off as as being hailed as one of the better leaders Africa's seen in recent years with his anti-corruption drives and things like that. He is still hailed and appreciated by a big chunk of Tanzanians for that. He's just unfortunately grown not to tolerate dissent, and sometimes when you're wrong, that's not a good position to have.
Sounds familiar.
Okay, we've done 25 minutes now of political
let's
and technical talk. Let's get into fun talk now.
Let's talk about fun stuff. So last time we had the pleasure of talking about our shared bond over Tagangola, though my experience sounded downright luxurious compared to yours. But not nearly as fun. Yours was definitely the most fun. What other fun?
What are we going to talk about? Branson?
Branson. I got a Branson.
What's the Branson?
I got a Branson story. Okay.
Oh my God! I can't wait.
It's actually a bit anticlimactic because I think everyone is looking up at this. But this was many years ago. So it has been 15 years ago. Yeah, 14, 15 years ago. If you remember, among Branson's various projects, he used to have an airline in Nigeria called Virgin Nigeria, which I once said actually is pretty much what you hear. If you ever gone to Duomo Square in Milan and seen any of the pimps there after night, they're all pointing at you like Virgin, Nigeria. So basically that. So But I always said to them
That's
that your
true.
branding is based on the Milan vice industry. But anyway, Virgin Nigeria was one of Richard Branson's projects, which was the national airline of Nigeria, founded in 2005. And at the time, I was running another airline, the national airline of a country nearby to Nigeria in the region. And effectively, VK, Virgin Nigeria's team, was basically run by a bunch of people from London on secondment, at least in the initial stages. So we had a bilateral air services discussion. So the British team flew in to us here, and they had some of the team from Virgin Atlantic head office come in, including one of their top directors who was representing the Virgin was trying to get the rights to fly here at the time. So we got into the usual, firing of tariffs and all the other boring stuff that a BASA negotiation comes through. And it dragged longer than expected. So his plan at the time had been he was going to take the Virgin Nigeria flight across to Lagos and then connect on the Virgin Nigeria Lagos to London flight, which was operated by wet lease Virgin Atlantic and so forth. But he missed the Virgin Nigeria departing, and he was grumbling because he's like, oh, now we're going to have to give the business to bloody BA and so forth. I'm like, hang on, you don't need to. We've got a flight going to Gatwick tonight as well. And he was amused. He was like, oh, we come on, we don't fly with these little African airlines. I'm like, what's it going to take for me to get you to fly with us instead? I mean, we're not even talking about money over here. I mean, he gets a freebie from BA, he gets a freebie from us. This was just pride on the line over here. So, like, what's it going to take for you to fly with us? So he's like, all right, if you can get me Miss Ghana to fly on your flight tonight, I'll come with you. Now, to my luck, one of our cabin crew was the former Miss Ghana. So I'm like, give me 5 minutes.
I'll do you one better. Not only will she fly with you,
she will serve you. So I went over there. I made a call. I'm like, Eric, what's she doing tonight? She's like, oh, she's not got anything. So nothing on the roster. I'm like, call her. Ask her if she can do London tonight. Made the call. She's like, yep, no problem. So I'm like, you're on. And he was like, seriously, you've got me Miss Ghana? I'm like, I've got you Miss Ghana. And we had him up there in business class, found out from someone what his favorite this was. So he was there. He got a champagne. He got everything all laid to him on a platter. He was absolutely ecstatic. And evidently, he then, when he was briefing Branson on the whole thing, was like, oh, and these guys in Ghana, when I went over there, I said I wanted Miss Ghana. And what did they do? We got Miss Ghana. So a couple of months later, they were having the 1-year party for Virgin Nigeria in Lagos, and Branson was coming down. And I suddenly got this. It wasn't a fair. It actually came across from Virgin Nigeria, a little box of something, and there was a note in it over there, like, Sir Richard has said we'd be very grateful to have you join this, and there was a little note inside, which just like, please make sure you come. I've heard wonderful things. Would be great to chat, kind of thing. So I had my little invite to Branson's party. And then on the day of the party, we had a technical problem with an aircraft and I couldn't go. So I was stuck on this. And as I said, it's anticlimactic, but it's a good story.
That is not. I mean, that is more personalized service than you'll get in the Etihad residence.
Yeah. No. But
I only got a signed picture of Shawn Mendes for the record.
I mean, you didn't ask. You could have said, I need Miss UAE on my flight. They would have been very confused. Everyone would have been confused. But
why are you missing the UAE? You haven't left it yet.
Now I have to Google all about Virgin Nigeria because I knew it existed. But so they had A340-300s, right? Was the biggest plane they had?
They started off with We started off with one A340-300 wet lease from Virgin Atlantic. Then it went to 2, so that was V-Sun and V-Bus, which were there. In 2007 January, the 340s went. They took on a BMI 8, and so they were flying one A340 daily to Gatwick, one A340 3 times a week to Johannesburg, 3 times a week to Dubai. Dubai didn't last long, so then they returned one of those. It went to Gatwick and Johannesburg. Then they dumped the 340s. They had a BMI A330, WWBD was flying that, and it had the premium economy, which was great because they never sold the premium economy. So if you were on a staff ticket, you always got the premium economy and a full row. But the armrest never went up, so it really wasn't good to have a home row. But anyway, I digress. So after
But
that,
now it would be great.
nowadays you get a whole row no matter what you're doing. So what difference does it make? So then they had A330s, after which they then got two 767-300s ex-Air Canada, which were put on a Latvian registry, LCY and LCZ.
I love how I asked Sean. I just want to ask a random question about, what planes do they have? And he's like rattling off exact planes.
Well, I'm telling you
right,
which planes they have.
Here's the tail numbers. This is the history of it. Here's the maintenance records. I just happen to have them in my phone because why not?
Further proof.
Why Latvia though? I don't know what the importance of that is.
There was a complex transaction which had to be put in place on that because the decision was that they wanted 767s, but they didn't want to put them on Nigerian registry at the time, insurance and various other permits and other reasons. So it had to go onto a neutral AOC. Lat Charter at the time which is now called SmartLinks. At the time, Lat Charter had just been brought out by Loftlevir, which is the subsidiary of Icelandair Group. And so Icelandair Group funded the transaction, but because if they'd put them on the Icelandic AOC, it would have been subject to the union regulations. And effectively, that would have put the price too high for what they needed to get done and work rules and stuff like that. Now, I know this because at the time I was leasing aircraft from Icelandair, which I wanted on the Icelandic, not the Latvian AOC. So effectively, there was a lot of mutual cooperation. There were reasons, but effectively it was put on Lat Charter. Icelandair Group bought Lat Charter and then put these on the Latvian AOC, these two 767s, which then flew for Virgin Nigeria till Jan 2009, when they pulled out of long-haul operations and focused on 7. That's when Branson actually divested his shares to Jimo Ibrahim, who was basically an insurance guy in Nigeria. Jimo brought out Branson and renamed it Air Nigeria.
So, okay, wow. So Danielle has a great question. So, first of all, how long have you now lived in Africa? That's not her question. I'm asking this because it's been, is it on and off for a while, or?
I moved to Africa in December 2004. I was here in Ghana from 2004 to 10 with Ghana International. Then from 10 to 12, we set up this airline, which I'm now with. In 13, I moved to Somalia. I was in Somalia till 14, then I moved to the UAE. I was in the UAE. I was resident in the UAE 14, 15, 16, 17 in theory, but 14, 15 primarily there. 16, I set up another airline in Uganda, back and forth in the UAE. 17, I moved to Malawi, which is home. It's where my wife's from and where home is. And I was in Malawi till 18 when they asked me to come back here to Ghana. And now I'm back in Ghana since 18 and stuck here now because borders are closed. But hey.
So your family's not with you?
No, just me here.
Yeah, that was my takeaway from that whole thing. Like,
that's sad.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
That means your dog's not with you either.
I know, but I get pictures pretty much very often.
Is he an emotional support animal?
No, neither of my dogs is our emotional support animal. They live for us to provide them emotional support rather than the other way around, I assure you. Emotional support and snacks, that's all they really care about.
So running, you've obviously had a lot of experience in African aviation. What has caused you, I guess, to do so much in Africa with airlines? Versus airlines are very global, so.
Or what drew you to Africa initially? I think is probably more Danielle's initial question was like, why?
That's a very good question. And I'm going to go back to 2004 at the time. So I was just finishing off my aviation management program in Canada and, was talking to my dad, who's also did 37 years with an airline. My mother is also ex-airline. So, but it's been an airline has been the obvious career. And talking to friends and stuff. And my general view at the time was, look, okay, I first got into the airline management side back in 2000 when TWA was filing for bankruptcy. So back then, I got involved with a group called Jet Acquisitions Group, who were attempting to buy the assets of TWA rather than American Airlines, and that really was what got me into it. Among other people who were involved with that group was Ralph Atkin, the founder of SkyWest. And it was actually Ralph who really inspired me that I wanted to be employee number one at an airline, because there's something about having employee number one. And believe me, it's a two-edged sword, because I've had employee number one at multiple airlines, and especially with Qatar Airways, I've had problems, because when I've been listing for staff travel on the phone, they've been like, yes, and can we get your employee number? And I'm like, one. And he's like, yes, can you continue? I'm like, no, it's just one. He's like, look, my system won't accept that. And I'm like, okay, 0000001. And he's like, that's better, thank you. So it's always a good thing to have employee number one. So in fact, at this airline, what we have is you have your employee number, after which you get 4 randomly generated digits. You can pick them yourself. So if your employee number is 1, you'll be 0001 and then 1234 or 9876 or whatever number you want to pick, 4 random digits after your actual employee number. So it just looks nice and long rather than just have
then
one.
We look
2,
like a
3.
big airline.
Well, when nobody thinks that we have 1 million employees, so it just sort of looks like a randomly generated number. But there's a method to the madness. So
sounds most fun.
It was. I mean, it's one of those things which you just like, I want to do this. So in 2004, when I was finishing up the program in Canada, Ralph was working then as a consultant with the government of Ghana to restructure Ghana Airways. And he was like, look, if you're not doing anything, we'd love to, join us, basically as an intern at the time, kind of, crunch some numbers, do some things for us. Like, great. So we spoke, we got into that. And then end of 2004, it was, okay, we need some people to get on the ground in Ghana to incorporate the company and start setting things up. Who's willing to volunteer from the team? And I was like, pick me. So I landed in Ghana, first time in Ghana, and we set up the national airline here, and that's what basically got me into African aviation at the time.
Okay, if I recall correctly, is my memory completely off? So that airline flew to Gatwick and Düsseldorf?
Gatwick, Johannesburg, Düsseldorf.
Okay. Didn't you fly almost every flight or something? Like you were also acting as station manager or something?
For a while, yes.
Can you explain? Like that's mind blowing to people. I was based in the head office, but I set up Gatwick Station 4. So I was a project manager for the setup. We were there 2 months in London, basically everything. I mean, from getting an office, picking the catering, negotiating the slots, hiring top to bottom, doing the VIP event for the launch, because believe me, that was one of the biggest headaches. So getting all that.
I'm sure. Yeah, that's 3 jobs actually in and of itself.
So, I mean, I had a team. It wasn't just me, but I was a project manager for that. So I was on that. Then at various points of time, we tried hiring station managers, and we hired some, they'd leave and so forth. But obviously I knew Gatwick top to bottom at that point, since I'd set it up. So every time there was a vacancy and we didn't have a station manager in Gatwick, it was, okay, I'm in charge of it. We had the same thing in Johannesburg when I set up the Johannesburg station, and again, when we didn't have a manager in that role, it was my responsibility. And for one horrendous period between 2006 and 2007, I was running both, as well as being in the office here. So my usual week would have been Sunday night, I'd fly down to Johannesburg overnight. I'd be in Joburg on the day, and Monday, I'd fly back here. I'd usually be in the office here Tuesday. Wednesday, I'd go. Saturday, Sunday, I would effectively 2 days a week in Johannesburg, 2 days a week in London, 3 days a week here, and 5 nights on the plane.
5 nights on the plane.
5 nights on a plane, business class, but yeah.
5
And
nights
then
on a plane.
absolutely, and it took a toll, genuinely, and I think that was the point at which I commented to you back then as well. You'll reach a point that you will not enjoy traveling, even in business class, even in whatever. And in 2008, when we set up Dusseldorf, at that time I was only managing London, and that was 1 week I remember, because it was the last week before we started up, and it was literally a case of every night I would be flying. For example, on the Monday night I flew Accra, London. From London, drove down to Southampton, caught a plane to Hanover, drove from Hanover to Braunschweig, where the LBA is, which is the German CA, the Luftfahrtbundesamt. Finished with that, drove down to Cologne, caught EasyJet back to Gatwick, flew back from Gatwick to Accra, spent the day in Accra, flew back from Accra to London, drove from London to Birmingham, flew from Birmingham to Hamburg, had meetings in Hamburg, GSA, stuff like that, flew back from Hamburg to London, caught the flight back from London to Accra, day in Accra, fly back over there, overnight in London, do a catering presentation, drove to Stansted to Dusseldorf, day in Dusseldorf, inaugural flight, flew Dusseldorf, London, back to Dusseldorf, back to Accra, back in Accra, flew back the next day to London. That was an actual week.
And were you married at this time? Because I have a lot of concerns.
I was not married at this time, and if I had been married at this time, I would not be married to the same person anymore.
You would not be married by the end of that. Yeah. Goodness
gracious. I was young. Genuinely, at that time, I was young. I was in my 20s. I could get away with it. My body could hold up to it. Now obviously I've lost a lot of hair due to things like this, and I would not recommend it to people. It's something that I've come to learn, and I think most people will get to learn once you've traveled. When you do 500,000 miles plus in a year, which I did in that 12-month period, it stops being fun. It genuinely stops being fun. And I was going through, back then, 2 passports a year. It was like January and July, I would be at the embassy getting a new passport. It was just like, they're like, "Hi, Sean, here for another passport." Right. And I'm like, "Yep, where's the form?" But fortunately, after that, the UK then had the IRIS automatic gate clearance, and then they stopped stamping me over here because they saw me every day. They were just like, "Please, just go." So, have there been fun days like that as well, such as the time which I actually went to London and came back without my passport, without even realizing I didn't have my passport? But let's not even go into that story. That's
So what? Okay, what? There's always somebody who can make you feel like they are so much crazier than you are when it comes to like flying things, and I'm just like, wow, this guy's crazy with his flying, which is so cool to hear. But good on you. That's wow.
No, and the difference though. The difference is, if I had a choice, I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
I didn't have a choice.
The non-optionality of it makes it much worse. It's a very big difference.
I have done mileage runs which are crazier than this, but I've enjoyed them. And and here's the irony: in the middle of that 1 year of that 500,000 miles, which would have been 7 or 8, would have been in that period. Right around then, one of these peak periods, I was like, I am getting burned out. What do I want to do? I want to do a mileage run. So I bought a ticket to fly the Emirates A380, which was brand new back then. And I flew London, Dubai, Johannesburg, Dubai, back to London in the course of, I think I left Saturday morning. I was back Sunday evening. And
you probably had an amazing time.
I had an amazing time. It was great. I de-stressed. I actually ran into a cabin crew on the Emirates flight who had applied for a job with us 2 years earlier, and I didn't hire her. And she was like, "Oh, Mr. Mendes, how are you? Do you remember me?" And I'm like, "No, I don't. Should I?" She's like, "I applied for a job." I'm like, "I take it we didn't hire you." But one thing, I'm very proud of the fact that 16 of our team who we hired back then from that airline are now with Emirates, have moved on to Emirates or Qatar, specifically Emirates and Qatar, 16 of them out of our initial group of 30. And
That's great.
I think that shows that our standards were very high. That's one of the proudest things was, and they were, for the most part, kids straight out of school. We interviewed 1,300. We selected 30, and of that 30, it's been they've done well.
Wow, that's a lot of people to interview.
Oh, that was interesting because it was because it was a national airline. We had to do it as an open recruitment, so it was in newspapers. And back then, it was not like you could apply via an online form. It was you put it in the mail and it'll show up. And 2 days after we did it, we went to the post office. We were like, "Hi, we're here to check our PO box," and they're like, "Oh, you guys," and they were like, "You're going to need to pay this deposit," and I'm like, "I'm just collecting my mail. Why do I need to pay a deposit?" He's like, "Well, there are 32 sacks of mail, and you need to pay a deposit for the sacks so that I know you're going to bring them back." And literally, we couldn't fit them in the car. We actually had to do 2 runs because they would not fit in the car. It was over 15,000 applications that were received, and most of them were rubbish. We narrowed it down to 1,300 or so, which actually made the short list. It was literally, we rented out a hotel ballroom, and well, it was 2 ballrooms. One was for the screening and one was for the actual group interviews. So we were like, the panel was out there. It was groups of 25 at a time. You had 30 minutes. You had numbers. Literally, it was like a contestant. You pinned on your number, and we didn't know names. We didn't know anything. They came over there, and we just had to score the numbers on our sheets based on a group discussion and questions. And we let them, and then the numbers were tallied up by a huge back office. We had like 30 people whose job was to just correlate, issue the numbers, and do everything. And then we shortlisted. And each of us on the panel had 2 wild cards we could pick. That people who didn't make the grade, but you could say, that one I want to jump into the next round. And I'm very proud. Both my wild cards turned out to be huge successes. One is now a senior purser with Emirates, and the other one flew with that airline, then flew with this airline, and just left a few months ago. So
That's amazing.
I love that.
That's really cool. So what airline are we going to fly together? It can be like we said last time, one that that you aren't that comfortable with but are comfortable with, or what airline?
Air Tanzania.
On the 787 or the A220 before or after it gets impounded?
The 787 would work. We could do Rwanda and Air Tanzania together, kind of thing.
Still waiting on Rwanda nonstop to New York. I guess they're A330-900 Neo. I don't know what happened there, but it seems there are.
Rwanda is an interesting situation right now because I was on a conference call with their CEO a few days ago, and one of their issues which they're struggling with right now is the fact that most of their crew are stranded outside the country. So even if they have a restart to come with, crew currency, simulators, training issues are what's really giving them the problem because they are so heavily dependent on expat crew. So when everyone was going through, it was an IATA call with all the African airline people, and Rwanda's comment was the biggest problem they're having is this. And I mean, everyone's got various problems. We're very lucky. We've taken the advantage of this downtime with borders closed to actually enhance our training regimen for our local staff. So we've actually promoted senior cabin crew. Just today, we did a promotion for 2 new captains. Young first officers who came to us straight out of flying schools and now 7 years down the line have made left seat. And we've got plans for a couple more to be done this year. And that'll give us pretty much zero dependence on, I won't say non-expats, but on commuting expats. So pretty much we've got a bunch of expats, Americans and stuff who've chosen to relocate here. For the lifestyle, for the stability, for whatever else. And so between them and our local team, we should, by the end of this year, have enough resource to be 100% dependent, which for an African airline, I mean, that's something. It was one of our key objectives we set up as a 10-year objective when we set up 8 years ago. And if we achieve it by 2020, that's going to be one silver lining from the COVID thing.
That's fantastic. Wow. That's really cool. I love when airlines have local pilots. I mean, it's very cool, especially, all over. It's great. I do love in general flying on airlines with expat pilots where I can guess their accents simply because I love to be caught off guard. Like, for example, when you're flying Fiji Airways and like the pilot has a really Southern American accent and, you just don't expect that. Or when you fly Air Astana, they have a bunch of Mexican pilots. Like, they apparently have a huge number of pilots from Mexico, which just seems like a somewhat random connection.
If you fly with us and with the expats, you're going to find primarily Brazilians and Argentinians. And we've actually made it a focus to try. Okay, I'm letting out secrets. I hope this doesn't wind up being an employment tribunal case at some point. But from our perspective, when we're hiring an expat, we're not looking for a Western world expat. Because let's be perfectly blunt, if I'm hiring an American pilot or a British pilot or whatever, I'm a stepping stone. He's either washed out, in which case I really probably don't want him, or it's a career stepping stone for him to build some hours before he gets an interview with Delta or British Airways or whatever else. However, if I'm hiring... the market
There's not
rate
like
is
the
market
relocation
rate.
and any of that concerns, or...
No, hell no.
Okay.
Believe me, if you're getting a left seat position here, you're making... I've got a guy here, for example, ex-ExpressJet. Now, he had personal reasons why he wanted to relocate here. So, he's an American we hired. But he says, his take home, because of the tax breaks of being non-resident and everything else, he's taking home more here than he was as a captain at ExpressJet. And certainly if he stepped up to a Delta or whatever in 10 years' time, whatever. But for the lifestyle, he's happy. He likes his Embraers. He likes what he's doing. And over here, he's in a left seat and he's got a fairly stable job, which is more than you could say if you were in the U.S. at this point. So,
right, sure.
When we look in terms of these, I wouldn't say third world guys, but people from economies where they want hard currency. You're actually not going to get the bottom of the barrel guys. You're going to get the top guys. These are the guys who can't find necessarily a stable job that pays them reliably there. But I can get a pick out of guys who are instructors, guys with 10,000 hours, guys who've got the experience on type, and who then can serve as mentors to my young first officers for 2, 3, 4 years until my first officers are ready to step up. So from our perspective, as long as the language proficiency is there, and that's been a bit of a struggle with some of these guys, but for what we have now is we've got a pool of excellent guys who bring in a different mindset, because they've flown in challenging, similar circumstances. I mean, without the best radar coverage, without the, all this thing. But it's been a different kind of challenge, which brings the right experience to it as well. So South Americans and Central Americans, Panama down to Brazil has been very fertile grounds for us to recruit from.
Interesting.
That makes sense.
That's very cool.
Ben, can you reintroduce Sean, please, for people who joined in later?
Yes, though I feel Sean is best off introducing himself because of how awesome he is. But we're joined again by Sean for the second time. He's our first repeat guest because of how awesome he is. He is an executive at an African airline, but more than that, he is an expert on all things related to every aspect of aviation, and he posts a lot of stuff on the internet, which is really cool. So, and he's a frequent commenter who is as smart as like 50% of the commenters combined. Not anybody on this, obviously, but the 50% who.
It's not wrong, but it's one of those things where like maybe that should.
Those people aren't tuning in, I'm sure, so we're good. But
are there any questions from the peanut gallery today? Usually, you're getting a lot more questions from them today.
There are questions. It's just
there was a question. People were your stories are just good. People were asking because Ben wrote about Delta's starting potentially that Atlanta, Joburg, Cape Town, Atlanta tag flight. What do you think about that?
I think it's been a matter of time before Cape Town opened up, and I think this is two birds with one stone. But to be fair, there's nothing which really stops Delta from operating the 350 with payload restrictions out of Joburg if they chose to. I think they've seen an erosion of their market, and I haven't seen the numbers on this, but that's my suspicion. We've seen the Cape Town to North America market grow over the last couple of years. It's something that we have been tracking very closely ourselves due to other affiliations we have with other airlines in the region. And I think United may have taken a bit of that chunk from them. And this was going to be, my bet is it was on their plan anyway. Remember, a lot of commercial decisions at Delta right now are being made by someone Glenn Houndstein, who has a very strong background in network planning. Decisions that Delta will take are very network driven right now, and I think that's where Delta is making such strong decisions, because the driving forces are looking at a network level rather than on individual market levels or so forth. And I think that's been a sea change. It's not something that really gets the CEO gets the headlines and so forth, but it's sometimes the small changes that happen behind the scenes and what's driving over there that really makes the difference to how an airline will develop and grow.
Are there more questions about us from this?
What is your that's a very thoughtful and good answer.
Because I know obviously you are involved in a lot of industry-wide things, so if you're comfortable answering this, I'm curious what answers. What executives do you particularly respect? You don't have to give reasons or whatever, but not necessarily due to any connection you have with them, but just like you really respect what they're doing at their airline or what they've done in their career, even if you don't know them. Just is there anyone or several?
I'm going to say something which you're getting to see of me over here is actually like the little fuzzy, sweet little Sean. You get me in a business context. I'm not usually friendly and nice. I tend to be a bit more scorched earth kind of thing. Honestly, the person who I've always admired, and now this will get me. Yeah, this is one way to piss off your readership. Since I was a kid, I've always admired Frank Lorenzo. Now, if this doesn't ring, it'll ring a bell. It'll ring a bell for some people who hate me, and the rest
know who it is. Yeah.
One of the biggest compliments I actually had was in a negotiation with a lessor, where it got ugly, but at the end we went and had drinks, and we closed the deal. And the guy used to work for Easton, and he says, "You remind me of a young Lorenzo." And I said, "That's the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me." And he just looked at me like, "You've never met Lorenzo, did you?" And I'm like, "No, but I'll take it as a compliment." It's like, it wasn't intended as one. I'm like, but I'll take it. So yeah, I will say that not necessarily for the way I think Lorenzo was a genius. Lorenzo forgot more about the industry than most people today have even learned. I think Lorenzo let his ego get ahead of him, and sometimes it's something. It's one of my philosophies, which I've learned actually from studying a lot of what Lorenzo did and so forth. Is if you're going to pick a battle, don't pick a battle you don't have the resources to win. If you're picking it, go in all out. And for example, if a competitor is undercutting us in a market, say we have a $150 fare and they're going with $110 fare, and we need to go down. Do we go to 109? I will never do that. If you're going to go in, you go shock and awe, overwhelming force, $5 each. Yeah, absolutely.
Sean, you and I should drink more. Because
we've actually done this, and don't pick a battle you're not ready to win is my philosophy on this. And that's probably an anti-Lorenzo, because I think Lorenzo let his ego get ahead of him to a point that he thought he was invincible and he could win more battles than he actually could. And that's what basically ruined his legacy. So that's your answer. Doug Parker reminds me a lot of Lorenzo, just for that record as well.
Really?
All battles must be fought with equal vigor, regardless of their merit or my capabilities to win. A little bit.
I'll just say it reminds me, for better or worse.
Less controversial question. A lot of the things that you've mentioned, like your cleaning and social distancing costs from COVID, Mike was wondering, is that getting reflected in fares, or you're just not making your X's and T's available right now? Are you going to be like these hotels and have a special COVID surcharge?
There's a constant debate on this, and it's numbers I'm getting running. And literally just before this, I was chatting with another exec who was saying, what are your numbers looking like and so forth. But here's the interesting thing. Right now, because of the drop in fuel prices and various other reductions in general costs because of the pandemic-related economic issues, our cost per available seat kilometer is actually down by a larger amount than the social distancing costs are imposing on us. So our margin per flight, even though the volume per flight is smaller, but the margin in percentage terms per flight is actually higher than it was pre-pandemic. It's just that there's a lot less of this to contribute towards overheads, which means you're going to take a loss because your overhead costs are going to be fixed. But in terms of margins, it's not really that bad because the fuel prices have brought it down with that.
Interesting.
So it's an interesting thing. And, these numbers are things which we're running these every single day. And
multiple times per day, I'm sure.
Well, I have an app which basically updates the loads for all my flights throughout the day, which is on my phone. And I wake up in the morning and it's the first thing I check. And before I go to bed, it's the last thing I check. And during the workday, I don't look at that as much, but I have an ops app, which again gives me where each of the aircraft is, which is a very simple line right now, And of course, flight radars got but the tools of the trade.
I have one last question, actually. What do you think, since you have been everywhere, what is the worst airport in Africa? Like just from a passenger experience standpoint?
Ben, you don't want to even start with this. When you start talking worst airport in Africa, define what you mean by an airport.
I say this because I feel like you've messaged me many times and you've been like, oh, this is an absolutely horrible lounge. This is an absolutely terrible whatever. And
Yeah, but what do you define as an airport? Do you mean something which has international scheduled service? Or do you mean something like Baledogle airstrip in Somalia, which is a U.S. drone base?
What is the worst airport that has a priority pass lounge or a lounge at all?
Well, that's a much narrower set of filters.
Yes,
yeah, the priority pass is actually difficult now. Because, there's some fairly large airports which don't have priority pass.
Or any lounge, any executive, if you would ever.
Can I add, Jeopardy music? I have a sound effects box that I never use.
What is... Okay. I'm going to hedge on this one as well slightly by going into one of my little qualified answers. I think a lot of airports in Africa, I don't really have a passenger experience view on those. I'm looking at it in terms of an efficiency view on those. And a lot of them have seen really big improvements in the last few years. If you've looked at Old Monrovia Airport, first time I went there was in 2005. It was the week after Charles Taylor had been picked up in Nigeria, and it was just for the first time Liberia actually believed this country may have a future. And we did an audit of the airport back then, and unfortunately, we did an audit on a Tuesday, which was not one of their electricity days. So it was they had electricity Monday, Wednesday, and Friday because they had flights on those days. And Tuesdays, they just had to run the generator for a little bit. The rest of the time, they got it from I think it was the Goodyear plantation, provided them free electricity. And, back then it was the office was in a temporary sort of, probably a former closet, because the guy's real office, he said, I'm sorry, it was attacked and burned down last year. So sorry for that. And you wanted a photocopy, it would be on the wall, and the man would take a camera and take a photo of it and then transfer it on his big desktop. It was 2005, and onto a pen drive. And was it even a pen drive? Was it a floppy disk back then? I think they had pen drives back then, but they had 5 MB capacity or something.
Right.
But and now when I look at the new terminal, which opened last year, it's world-class standard. So I think maybe painting it and saying that, a lot of these airports are progressing. They're doing the best with the resources they have. I look at it more in terms of, are they doing as much as they can with the facility they have? And if they're doing that, I'm going to say they're achieving it. Now, some airports like Lagos, it is a woeful passenger experience. Until you know how to live it. We are the largest carrier in Nigeria. We flew more international flights to and from Nigeria than all the Nigerian airlines put together. So we were 200 times a month plus in Lagos and Abuja. So obviously I was there fairly frequently. And for me, I never had an issue. I knew which corridor to go through, where to go through there. But then I read people doing the same things, and you've seen my video of transit at Lagos.
Yes.
It could not be any simpler. But then I read people's nightmare stories because they follow the sign and go down the steps. And once you go down the steps, that's the black hole. You don't come out of there. But as long as you know no, it's true. Once you go down there, literally, it's 2 escalators going down, and there's no way up. So the only way, once you go down that escalator, you've got to have somebody stop an escalator and let you walk back up, which they're not going to do. They'd rather just, hold you forever. So as long as you don't go down, nobody's going to check you. Nobody's going to do anything. You just walk around and you're good. That's what you're supposed to do. But if you go the wrong way, you'll wind up stuck.
I know you love Airpeace so much. So will you fly to Sharjah with me? Pretty please.
No comment.
Sounds like, first of all, you can't even get here because you can't leave the house. Second of all, the first place I go on a flight is going to be to where my wife and dogs are, not to Sharjah.
I mean, Sharjah sounds fun.
Sharjah,
Airpeace sounds fun to Sharjah. Huh.
I have a, how do you put this?
I know
a
you have
mixed relationship with Airpeace. Let's leave it at that front. They are consistently trying to steal my pilots and engineers. And have I told you stories about this?
Oh, I'm aware.
One day, not on a public thing, I'll tell you the story of the day Airpeace ordered their E-jets, the E2s in Mauritius, because we were there with them in Mauritius for the Embraer conference the day they were ordering it, and then Embraer took us out for the party on the catamaran. I think if you've looked at my Facebook, you've seen the pictures of it there, and there's some videos on it there. But some of the conversations with the Airpeace people that day were more than interesting, but not for a public forum.
I will have to make my trip then soon to Ghana once they let in Americans or Germans or anyone. But isn't it?
It doesn't have to be Ghana. It can be anywhere else in the world.
That's true. But I feel like this is my chance to go to Ghana finally. It's been on my list, so there's never been there has been a better time. I'm not like right now, but I'm saying there's never been a better time than whenever.
The best time was when you could have done SAA connecting to AWA, connecting to Airpeace. The schedules lined up. You could have tried the 330 business class. You could have done everything, but hey, that's no more. All the 330s are gone now. SAA, all the 330s are gone. Last 4 went back to the US over the weekend.
Yeah,
the 300s have been grounded since March. The 200s are now all back except one, which is out of C-check, but she's parked. So it's just the 340s and the 350s left.
This is too fun. We're already way over, but it's always fun with Sean. Hopefully join us again soon. Thank you for the stories and for the insights and for everything. And maybe we'll get to do one of these in person soon-ish. Not soon, but eventually. Ish. Exactly. But thank you so much. I know was it midnight, 11:42 or 12:40? 11:42.
11:42.
Oh, that's really late. It's my bedtime. So
yeah.
And thank you to everybody who tuned in. And sorry, I'm falling. So not at your stories, just that it's my bedtime. 8 p.m. is sharp.
That's a bit like the Frank Lorenzo backhanded compliment.
It's intended as such. But thank you for joining us, and thanks to everybody who tuned in, and have a nice evening.
Yeah, we'll see you guys on Sunday.
Bye.
Bye-bye.